On August 7, 2018, escorted by more than 300 volunteer motorcyclists, a combination of police, fire, and EMS departments representing various municipalities, the Walden Hills was transported by way of an enormous tractor trailer through the streets of McKeesport to Jimmy Long Field in McKeesport's Renzi Park. Once there, it stood on display, open to the public for 24 hours a day until Sunday, August the 12th. Mayor Michael Cherepko of the city of McKeesport and Congressman Mike Doyle had this to say about the arrival of the Walden Hills.
This here is like the Super Bowl. This is the Super Bowl of any way we could possibly show the respect to all of those who have served, because all have given some, and some have given it all. And you are all heroes. But let me tell you, the ones that paid that ultimate sacrifice, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not extremely grateful. All too often, we all take for granted that we live in the greatest country on this planet. And let's be very clear, we know who our heroes are and we know who to thank. So from the bottom of my heart, personally and as mayor of the city of McKeesport, I want to thank each and every one of our veterans out there, all of those that paid this ultimate sacrifice, to all the families that have lost loved ones. When you deal with the Vietnam War, it hits close to home with me. For those who don't know, my father has 2 Purple Hearts. And we all know that he was very close to not making it. He doesn't make it, I'm not here. And through the works of the good Lord, he's fortunate to be one of the ones that aren't on this wall.
How many of you have been down to the wall in Washington, D.C.? How many of you know somebody on that wall?
Right here.
Yeah. There's something about that wall when you walk past it, and I've been past it several times over the years I've been in Congress. I don't know what it is, but there's something that just radiates from that wall and just touches your very spirit. It's a hard thing to describe. The silence as people walk down there and just put their hands on someone's name that they know. You know, this was a war when a lot of these young men and women came back that the country wasn't as grateful as it should have been. And this was a terrible war that went on for a long time, and 58,000 names are on that wall. It's hard to believe that many men and women gave their lives for our country in that battle. But today, I want to thank the city of McKeesport and the mayor and everyone who was involved in bringing this wall here, not just for McKeesport, but for all of Western Pennsylvania, to give us a chance to come down and walk past this wall once more and put our hands over the name of a loved one or somebody that we grew up with that gave their lives in that Vietnam War, and just once again to say thank you. Thank you to the men and women who served us. Thank you to the men and women who serve us today. I think we learned a lot of lessons during that war, and we learned a lot about thanking the men and women that serve in the military. Less than 1% of the country does that. Less than 1%. And it's up to the 99% of us that don't serve to make sure we thank the men and women that serve us every day. So God bless each and every one of you. Thank you for bringing this wall to Western Pennsylvania, Mayor.
Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk. I'm Diane Richard, your host. The arrival of the Walden Hills to McKeesport, Pennsylvania, bearing the names of 58,318 men who were killed in action in Vietnam, bears a stark resemblance to another visit to Pennsylvania. That visit was made on November 19, 1863, by President Abraham Lincoln to the blood-stained battlefield of Gettysburg, PA, where he, in his attempt to heal the divided nation, delivered his Gettysburg Address. In his address to the thousands who were in attendance that day, President Lincoln then said, and I quote, "It is for us the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work for which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the full measure of devotion." Unquote. During the opening ceremony for the wall that heals, we listened to these remarks by numerous officials.
Good morning. This has been an incredible week. On Tuesday, I arrived here and Detective Joe rolled off his motorcycle with a cigar between his teeth. And he introduced himself as being the captain for the ride. And he was absolutely on ninth cloud of heaven. He said, "This is the best thing to happen to McKeesport since 1962. And I kind of scratched my head and said, I'm sure there's some other things that happened in McKeesport since 1962, but in the last week I've seen that reveal that this has been an incredible thing. I think it's only fitting that 1962 was the beginning of this war. 1962, while not the first casualties, was when we as a nation began to focus on this. In 1962 is when the young men from McKeesport, some 11 from the Boys and Girls Club, and ultimately 23 would be deployed overseas into the land of Vietnam that many had never heard and most people didn't understand, and gave their lives. America and our warriors come from incredible cities like McKeesport. It's not the Bostons, it's not the New York Cities, it's the heartland of America where they're willing to roll up their sleeves and stand up and defend our Constitution and our freedoms. And McKeesport offered so many. Bringing this memorial to this town was an obvious, easy choice. We could go to far better cities, but why not bring it to a town where it matters so much? For 4 years ago, Walt Yeager came to me while I was in Beaver, Pennsylvania, and introduced me to the McKeesport 23 and the first ever memorial to the Vietnam War, and said, "Tim, you've got to come see this. Tim, we've done something special. Tim, let me give you this report that my son wrote." I read that report and I was like, man, that kid was a whole lot smarter than I ever was, even in college. The legacy of McKeesport and the way in which you have honored your veterans continues to this day. And so it goes without saying that a little over a year ago, when Walt and VBI and the various veterans organizations applied to host the wall, first off, there's a name we recognize. Second, it was someone we knew who could do it. And third, an organization who is in and around this community and does things all the time to honor theirs fallen from McKeesport in this region. So when we looked through those 109 applications and selected the 38, not surprisingly, McKeesport got to host one of those 38 stops this year. And it was magic. It was magic because through their connections within this community, through their outreach efforts, others came to join. Whether it was the senator's office or the mayor's office, whether it was the Lions Club, or whether it was just people who were from the parks committees or anything else, they said, if this is going to be part of McKeesport, if this is going to resound, we're going to make this happen. Hundreds of volunteers were out here 24 hours a day. Last night at 11:30, when over 400 people came through this wall in the darkness, we had over 6 volunteers in yellow jackets happily there. It absolutely makes sense because this is McKeesport. McKeesport bringing the wall then allows you all to focus on a much larger group, beyond that 23, beyond those 11, to the 58,318 Americans here. And focus on those Vietnam veterans in your midst, because they need that healing and they never had that option. On Friday, a very tall gentleman came up to me and he said, "I'd like you to help me find a name." I said, "Sure." I said, "Do you know his name?" He said, "No, I don't. I just can't remember it. I've been trying to remember it for 50 years. I said, "All right, well, let's see what we can do. What unit were you in?" Was he in the same unit? We figured out that unit. We went a little further and we looked at a date, and I said, "What date?" or "Give me a date range." And he said, "No, I'm certain. I know exactly what date." And he gave me the date. I knew something was up. And I looked at his unit and I looked at that date, and there were 3 deaths on that date, and I started to read through the names. And I focused on one and I said, "How about Sergeant Wisnut?" And he said, "Absolutely, that's it. That's the one." And he immediately broke down. And when you have a guy bigger than you standing next to you and he starts to well up with tears, you can't help but well up with tears yourself. He broke down, had to take a deep breath, had to step away, gathered himself and came back. And he said, I can't believe after 50 years I finally identified him. You see, he was my medic. He was administering aid over the top of me when he was shot and killed as I lay there wounded. And you finally allowed me to have that closure. You finally allowed me to have that healing. And we went off and we found another first lieutenant who he clearly knew the name because it was one of the best leaders he ever had. And we talked, and I let him go his way. And he came back yesterday, and he came back to those names, and he asked me, he said, Tim, can I see those pictures again? And I showed him the pictures of his medic, and he again had some tearful moments. And of course, I did too. We went back to his lieutenant and said it. And I said, sir, have you ever been to the wall? He said, no, I've never made it down to the wall. I said, so this is the first time you've seen these names? He said, yes. I said, have you been in McKeesport your entire life? He said, yes, I was born and raised here. I know the story of the 23. I know the story of the 11. We all went off and served together, and we were proud to do it. And if I hadn't met my wonderful bride, I would have stayed in the military forever. He then turned to me and said, this wall has promised me and promoted me healing. This wall has given me things I can't possibly imagine, and I thank you so much for bringing this to town. From those 11 boys and the 23 in McKeesport, from the vision that Walt had when he decided to apply and bring this to this community, to the 58,318, we had hundreds upon hundreds of similar experiences, that gentleman that we had yesterday. And through that healing, through that time here with this National Memorial in their backyard, you've continued to honor the legacy that perhaps was started with Kennedy coming here in '62, but it's all going to come back to when the wall that heals was here in 2018. Because when you have a Memorial Day and a Veterans Day, when our veterans gather to have a parade, there's a new tie and there are new stories. And that healing that began this week, will continue for years and years to come. And the 10,000 visitors, the over 10,000 visitors that you brought here, are going to be able to take this word forward and continue the legacy of the 11, continue the legacy of the 23, and continue the legacy of the 58,318 Americans inscribed on these panels. Thank you very much for hosting us. It has been an absolute incredible journey to be here. It has been such a pleasure, and I have made some friends that I hope to have for a lifetime, and I have found some inspiration that I will cherish in my heart for decades to come.
As I stand before you now, I can honestly say, and I said this the other day at the motorcade, in 7 years as mayor of the city of McKeesport, I have never been so proud to stand before each and every one of you on behalf of the city of McKeesport. In the city of McKeesport and throughout the whole Mon Valley, for that matter, we always look for different ways that we can honor our veterans, different events, whatever it may be, to show them the respect that they deserve. Because all too often in this country, we take for granted that we live in the greatest country on this planet. So I can tell you, when we had the opportunity to get this wall, and Mr. Yeager and everything he did to help bring this wall here, I can't tell you how ecstatic I was. I can't even imagine what many of you are going through with the 58,318 names that are on this wall, whether they were a friend, a family member, a classmate, whatever the case may be, for all those that paid that ultimate sacrifice. I can relate to it just on a small portion of what you've gone through and what all of our veterans and all the veterans have fought so that we can live in this country. For those that don't know, my father, Gene Sharepka, who will be receiving a pen today, has 2 Purple Hearts. And when I see people get emotional, I can't imagine what they're going through because I wasn't there. I didn't have the opportunity to serve, and I sure wasn't there during the Vietnam era when our troops came home and they weren't welcomed. But I can tell you what, it's up to about 5 or 6 years ago, my father would never even talk about it. And I can see what it means to him. And I can tell you how grateful I am for each and every one of our veterans. To my father, I'm so unbelievably grateful for the wonderful father you are. But to be honest with you, I cannot be prouder for you have served our country. And I thank you. To all the veterans that have served, to those that lost loved ones, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Personally, I want to say thank you. On behalf of the city of McKeesport, I want to say thank you. God bless each and every one of you.
Good evening, McKeesport. How about it, huh? All right. If you're not from McKeesport, say you are. It's a good night to do that. Okay. I'm very humbled to have been asked to speak this evening, and I echo the comments of Mayor Shrefko and Austin Davis. But last night or yesterday, when we saw the day before yesterday, we saw the motorcade with the motorcycles and the different folks that participated. It kind of brought to my mind some of the things that we go through when we're in these positions. You see, in most countries, or many countries, folks like us don't get an opportunity to be mayors and senators. Somebody tells people what they're going to do. The people on this wall, the men and women on this wall, the 8 million that served in the armed services, were it not for them, we wouldn't be able to gather here tonight. And we forget that. Our young kids don't know that yet. So when you leave here today, we need to remind the young kids. The wall itself, and Tim will probably speak on this, they're going to make about 40 stops this year, I think. And for those that can't make it to D.C. to see their friends and their loved ones, this is an opportunity for local communities to get engaged with this particular memorial. Because many of the folks can't get up there, and they think every day, see, unless you lost someone in the war, or you know someone that fought in the war, if you've never been in a war, you can't really embrace what they went through. And I get a little frustrated because sometimes I think maybe I'm a little spoiled. Maybe I take for granted what I'm doing. And then I catch myself. I have an opportunity to help you do what you want to do, not what I want to do. Reinvent communities like the Mon Valley that have fallen on hard times. Rebuild our communities one brick at a time, one street at a time, one community at a time, because of the people on the wall and the people that are here with us tonight. Were it not for them, we wouldn't have the wherewithal to do that. Our job is to improve the quality of life for Americans and send a message every day to the rest of the world that we are the greatest country in the world because we live in a democracy that gives you a right to have an opinion. Without our veterans, that doesn't happen. And I just wanted to say that because we don't get an opportunity often to give thanks to the many veterans that have paid the price and those families who've lost folks. And I know there were 23 of us in the McKeesport, 11, I believe, at our boys club. Well, and Walt and I are having discussions now about getting McKeesport named the first Vietnam War memorial in the state of Pennsylvania. We're going to do that through legislation. And I'm going to be a little defensive here. McKeesport and other communities in the surrounding neighborhood represent strength and resilience and toughness. And we're taught that because of what our veterans did for us. It would be embarrassing not to do what they expect of us. And that's the thing that we have to pass on to our children. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. It's an honor to be here. It's a great crowd. God bless you, and God bless America.
It has been said by numerous people that after having shared the same mud, same blood, while suffering through the horrible experience of the Vietnam War, that our returning veterans longed for, but never received accolades or ceremonies. But what they really wanted and often dreamed of was to return home to the simple pleasures of life, such as attending church with their families and friends, visiting their favorite high school teachers, playing ball with their siblings, or just being able to walk around town proudly displaying their uniforms or colors. Instead, and we all know that story. I had the privilege of speaking with Tim Tetz, Director of Outreach with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, who not only shared the healing legacy of the wall, but he offered a wealth of knowledge about the impact that the Vietnam War had on the public and gave us valuable insight into his efforts to assist those veterans who suffered as a result of wounds received in the Vietnam War. Let's listen as Tim explains.
This morning we had a guy out at the wall who was looking for two guys who had died in 1967, and I caught him as he was glancing up and down the panels. I mean, he was trying to go through the names, and I don't think he certainly didn't know their names in the back of his head. He knew what it sounded like, and he was waiting to have the name prompted to him, but he didn't know, and he was looking around panel 10 or 11. You're looking at 500 names per line, per panel, and it was just an incredible thing. And he said, well, he died on February 20th, 1967, early enough in the war, and of course because he was he was looking for two Navy guys, you knew that there was going to be a better chance of finding them than someone else. And so we were able to identify who that person was, and magically find the name of the first. And I said, well, I said, I don't have anybody here on February 20th in the Navy except for this corpsman. And he was like, no, he would have been with the Marines. He said, I'm looking for two river guys. And so I expanded it out to look at all the Navy folks from February of '67, and there were 28 in total. And he and I scrolled through the names, and we found the one name, and he said, bingo, that's exactly the guy right there. And he said, where's his name? So we pulled up his name, we showed it to him there on the panel, and he just, he broke down crying, and he goes, okay, well, that's one. He said, so the other guy died 2 days before or 2 days later. And so we looked, and I read through some more names, and we found the other guy's name a little bit further down. And he remembered that he was from Omaha, Nebraska. He remembered that the first guy was from Ohio. And he finally then had two names. And so we were able to do a rubbing for him to show the two. And we were talking about, it came about to service. And he's like, who did you serve with? And I said, I was in the Coast Guard. And he goes, wow. He said, you guys were there, and you guys lost some folks there. And I said, I understand that, and I know their legacy. And he goes, these guys were river guys from the Navy. And I said, they were side by side with the Coasties. And he said, I was in there as a radio guy. He was sitting on shore. And he said, you want to hear this story? And I said, yeah, I'd love to hear this story. And he goes, I was sitting on shore, and it was no further from where we're standing now to the end of the wall. And I all of a sudden heard over the radio these two guys call in, and I hear this yelling of grenade. And all of a sudden I see this giant explosion, and I'm certain that these two guys have been killed. And he said, I'm out there all alone, infiltrated into this deep dark jungle. He said, I might have had a clip, maybe two of ammunition, and there was nothing I could do. He said, I had to sit there, and I had to know that I witnessed and had experienced the last moments of their life. And he said, I didn't know, what to make of it and go. And he said, now for the first time today, he said, I've been able to identify those two names, and he was able to take it home. He said, I've been with the Vet Center and working through all those things, and he said, but I haven't been able to for sure nail down those until today. And so it's those stories and those magical moments that you sit there and go, you've offered some healing and some closure for this gentleman. And yet on the flip side of it, that you've exposed some names and some stories. He's going to have to grapple with that nightmare tonight. And he's going to have to grapple with it many more times. And you hope that after 50 years, 51 years in this case, that there's going to be some more healing that comes out of that and have that group do. You get to experience that every day, multiple times a day. And that's always the magic that, when someone says, hey, let me tell you a story, you're like, absolutely.
And I bet you have
let me
like
grab
a
it.
ton of them.
I have hundreds. And
my
I love
gosh.
it. It's, I've been meaning to write it all into a book and a website, but there's some magical stories. The wall is, as I say, I'm but a student of the wall. I am continuing to learn. I know a whole lot about a lot of the history and a lot of the nuances and a lot of the secrets of the wall. But every single time I'm able to meet someone who has a tie or a story from the wall, then I'm able to learn more stories about more of these people. And that's the magic that drives you on after a 12, 14-hour day, or when you're out in the rain, is to be able to say, hey, who's going to bring me the next story that's going to make me better and smarter to be able to live out the legacy that these men and women left us.
What brought all of this to your heart and to your soul to want to be able to do this?
I think it's been an evolution. I served in the Coast Guard. I came back, and I was a product of American Legion Boys State. And they, I had grown up in the shadow of a 3-war veteran, a Marine Corps veteran, and I idolized him. And when he died when I was in 4th grade, he left behind a Bear Bryant shirt, the great Coach Bear Bryant. I had no clue who Bear Bryant was. But that shirt became my night shirt. That burgundy shirt became my night shirt with Bear Bryant's logo on it. And I remember putting that shirt on every single night when I wanted to go to bed. And I would still feel and smell John. I still could imagine what he was. And I could imagine his embrace and that great man that he was. And John was a 3-war veteran from the Marine Corps. He had front row seats for the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Fought his way across the Pacific. Went back to Korea and was battlefield commissioned in Korea, where he received a Silver Star, and then he did at least 1, if not 2 tours in Vietnam. And the man walked on water to me. And so there was this legacy of service. My father had served in the National Guard during the war, and there was just a sense of duty and obligation that you get, whether you're in Scouts or whatever, and being brought up by family, that you need to serve in some way. And so, natural progression, I ended up in the military. And when I got out of the military, the American Legion came to me and said, "Hey, would you help us with the Boy State program?" And that evolved into a opportunity to go work on the Nevada legislature and help pass veterans legislation and be more and more involved with the American Legion. And involved on the national legislative front, and then ultimately working as the national lobbyist for the American Legion before I left them and kind of still worked for veterans and worked for veterans. Along the line, I met Jan Scruggs, the founder of the Wall, in the early 2000s, late 1990s. And Jan and I met in a congressional office, and he was on the Hill lobbying for something for the Wall. And I was there, of course, advocating for veterans. And Jan and I became friends, and he would get me to lobby on his issues, and he would ply me with good dinners and some good drinks and some cigars, and we would go lobby on the Hill. And in 2012, I had my own shingle out. I was lobbying for a group of various different people. And Jan said, "Hey, how about you come in and work in the House for me?" And so I helped them pass some legislation that fall and came back in-house and kind of took over the outreach program. So I oversee everything that we do within our organization. And it's that natural evolution. I'm still working with veterans. I still get, this morning I answered a call about what burial benefits were. Not something I would have from this job, but something I carried forward from another job. And so it's that evolution of our nation on how we're dealing with veterans, and it's that evolution of the program to go from being a total volunteer to then working for the government to now working again for a nonprofit, to say, how can I help veterans and their family members forever be remembered?
Not to get on a political soapbox.
Sure.
How do you feel veterans are being treated, and what do you think can be done better by our government?
I think that we're blessed, and we have been blessed since 2001, of a rewriting of how we deal with the veterans. And that's because of twofold, maybe more. First off, 9/11 was the first major war, major engagement that we had had since Vietnam, that made our nation focus on it, knowing that we're all in this together. We hadn't had that sort of sense of purpose since probably World War II. We certainly didn't have it in Korea. We certainly didn't have it in Vietnam. But we were attacked on our own home front. And we were going to send our boys and girls over to fight this in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we were going to be together behind it. Not at all disparaging against those that are of my generation who found the first Persian Gulf. But we were here to do that, and there was that mission. Secondly, I think we had the Vietnam veterans who had come of age and maturity within our nation, who said, you know what, I didn't get treated correctly when I went away to the war. I didn't get treated when I came back home. And we're going to do right by these. And they showed up to send people off. And they sent things over. And they showed up to bring them back home, no matter whether they were coming back home beneath a flag-draped coffin or whether they were coming back amongst a plane load of their fellow National Guardsmen returning home to their state. We were there for them. So that immediate reaction amongst our nation from 2001 on was a total transformation of our nation. But moreover, when I see and worked with Congress over those years in our states, our state legislatures were all of the, how do we improve this? How do we make certain that we get more benefits? How do we make certain that we take care of these folks? And how do we move forward in taking care? And you see an entire transformation. The VA budget has tripled, even quadrupled over those time periods to make sure the benefits. The GI Bill, that has been given to the military since September 11th provides for educational benefits, not only for the service member, but for his or her family. I mean, unlike any better, benefit we've ever had from any other war period, we truly are taking care of them. Certainly as we're starting to tighten in budgets, and certainly as some things come on, we have some challenges in front of us.
Right.
And I think that we really need to be concerned as we start to get war weary, as we start to say, well, do we need to get out of Afghanistan? Do we need to get in Iraq? Do we need to go into Syria or into somewhere in Africa? Mm-hmm. As we get that war weary, we're also going to get that weary of, when are we going to be done paying for these people? When are we going to be done writing these checks? So far, I think that we're still coalesced around the fact that, hey, these young men and women are amongst 1%, 2%, or 3% who are willing to go off and serve that, and we're taking care of those benefits. And yet, I think we're starting to see some repeats of some of those illnesses and issues that we saw out of Vietnam,
right,
that we're starting to try to grapple with. I think we're doing it better. I mean, it took until the 1990s for the federal government to recognize that we made these soldiers, sailors, and airmen sick in Vietnam, and we now are going to admit that. But we're still, from the first Persian Gulf War, 1990 to 2018, 20 years. We haven't figured out what the whole burn pits and other issues are coming. But I think that hopefully with the legacy that the Vietnam War has left in that, I think that's a bigger situation that we'll see a response and better benefits being delivered.
Well, I know now that there's a lot coming out about Agent Orange, and what a lot of the servicemen endured when they would, come through and spray the agent down.
Sure.
And it just dissipated everything in its path. But then they're inhaling of that.
Correct.
And everything going into their lungs, and years down the road, now the effects of that have, come to life.
Right.
So I'm just wondering what the government is doing about that. And I know you're speaking to the benefits that you're trying to work through that.
I think that, when you look at Agent Orange and the defoliants we used, and there were others other than just Agent Orange, but that certainly is the best known one.
Right.
The defoliants we sprayed in Vietnam, we did it on the Korea War Zone and everything else. There are statistical studies that show that it's linked to 14 or so diseases, where if you get that disease and you're able to show that your boots on the ground in Vietnam, that you served actually in country, and you come down with one of those diseases, the scientific evidence is there that it's an automatic benefit thing. So there's those situations. And yet there are many other diseases that are tentatively involved to a level, but the disease is such a rare disease that we don't have enough statistical evidence to push that over the board, or the disease is not quite met that statistical threshold to get there. And I feel horrible for those families who are stuck in that.
Yes.
I think a bigger population that we have to also keep in mind is all those folks who were just offshore, who don't have that quote-unquote boots on the ground situation. Those folks who are on those destroyers or their aircraft carriers, some of the studies have shown that the defoliants would get in the water, obviously come out into the entire harbor. They'd use that same harbor water in their desalination plants, and you were still getting that. Or you'd get the cloud mist over and everything else.
Yes,
absolutely. And I think that Congress passed through the House just recently an Agent Orange bill to include everyone that was within what is considered the Blue Water Navy, and to try to get those benefits. It's got a really big uphill battle to get through the Senate, and I think time will tell whether that makes it this term. But this is the first time in the 20 years that I've been seeing legislation go through the Hill in Washington that we've got that Blue Water piece passed. Congress is slow sometimes to respond to the benefits and the needs of the veterans. They're still slow, especially when you're talking about a significant price tag like this was.
Yes.
They were slow on concurrent receipt. They were slow when it first came to the original Agent Orange. I'm optimistic that they're going to get it right, and I think we're slowly starting to bend towards that and see the winds change direction in that Agent Orange benefit.
Well, I'm hoping that some of those veterans will be able to reap any benefit from it while they're still living.
Sure.
Because our Vietnam veterans are aging.
Yes, absolutely.
And, you know, I'm just hoping that they will be able to benefit from that before passing on.
Yeah, I think that when we look at it, and I don't have, you know, I wish I had the solid number on it, but there's 58,318 Americans on the wall. I think we're probably losing at least that much each year to the ravages of what they had to experience in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. So because of Agent Orange, because of PTSD, because of the various different things that are now manifesting themselves, having that, losing that many people each year, once they're gone, in so many ways, are they really forgotten if they're not on that wall? And it's a hard struggle to have those conversations with those people of saying, you know, they come down to the wall that heals, or they come down to the wall in Washington, D.C., and they say, I wish my dad could have seen this. I wish my dad would have been here. You know, just earlier today, I had a lady come up to me during one of the rain showers, and she was just absolutely tearful. And she extended out a shaky hand and shook my hand as she had been introduced by a volunteer. And she had misunderstood from the volunteer on how her dad could get recognized. And so we began to talk about the In Memory program. The In Memory program was really started by friends and families of those who had lost their lives in their battle to the ravages of what happened to them in Vietnam, whether that was PTSD, whether that was alcoholism, whether that was all the different diseases to Agent Orange, which when it was started hadn't fully been vetted by the government. And yet there was a big push to try to get them on the wall. And clearly, as I had asked my son to do when he was in middle school, I said, figure out how big that wall would have to be if we took the 3.1 million Americans and we put their names on it, and we had it 10 feet tall like the wall in Washington, D.C. at its apex. My son figured it out. It would be a 1.5 miles long with the names on it on both sides.
That's incredible.
That's incredible.
That's incredible.
So you'd be talking about the 3.1 million, you know, you're on a scale that's roughly double of what we had that died in World War II. And so you just sit there and go, wow, that's a significant number. We can't do anything for that. But the In Memory program we can do, and we can live out that legacy. You know, our memorials, and I think the Wall That Heals is a testament to this, is that we can't always get to Washington, D.C.
Correct.
But we can go to the internet, and we can find the In Memory honor roll, and we can find a loved one on there. So whether you're the third cousin twice removed, or whether you're someone who's 2 generations from now, who wants to go back and look at your grandfather who served in the war, to be able to go to their In Memory page, to be able to see them and see their pictures and see the remembrances and the stories behind, is one of those incredible amounts of closure. So this young lady came to us today, and she had wanted to recognize her dad who died last December. And it was fresh. It was a real fresh wound in her mind. And she said, you know, how do I recognize him? And we got out the brochure, and, you know, it's something as simple as providing a DD-214 that showed they were in country, to show they died of a disease. We don't require that it has to be service connected, but obviously their life was shortened in some way. And then ultimately, we'd like to see some pictures of them, because when we can personify who these individuals were, their names come to life. And so she's going to provide those to us. And then next Father's Day weekend, we have an incredible event at the Wall each Father's Day. It is probably the biggest and certainly the most emotional ceremony we have at the Wall each year. Memorial Day and Veterans Day are often left for politicians and VIPs to come and address the audience. But in Memory Day, the Saturday before Father's Day weekend, the speakers and the participants are the family members and the friends. So 400 to 500 family members and friends are going to parade across the stage, and they're going to have a moment to say, my grandfather, John C. Johnston, United States Marine Corps, Vietnam, 1968-69. And they'll be followed by several hundred more, and they'll be probably preceded by several hundred more. And it's their opportunity to highlight the service and sacrifice of their family member. And then, of course, as I always tell people, they need to come back on Father's Day, because on Father's Day we place about 4,000 roses against the wall for the fathers. And it's one of the most immediately impactful and heart-wrenching moments that you'll see, is to see all those laid there by volunteers and stay there for more than a couple of days.
That's incredible.
Yes.
It's just incredible. Get myself together here. So let's transition back to the Wall.
Okay.
Okay. So how does the Wall get here? What process is needed? And then how do you make it happen? The transport in the big tractor trailer to
Sure.
the carrying of the panels and the erection of the wall.
Sure. It begins with the idea or vision of a person. And much like the creation of the wall and Jan Scruggs saying, I want to build a memorial, it's someone in a community saying, I want to bring this to my town. And you have to have that passion, that initiative, and then build it from there. And I think Walt did a wonderful job here of saying, you know what, I want to have this. He's got a legacy with the McKeesport Memorial and everything that is in that. But Walt came up with the idea of saying, hey, I want to bring this here.
Walt Yeager.
Walt Yeager. And so Walt went out and started to do that. And of course, he went to the folks that he's most familiar with, those Vietnam veterans and the Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, and went to that group and said, hey, would you be there for me? But it takes so many people and it takes so much that you have to start to build it from there. Somewhere along the lines
Does this take years?
It could take years.
Okay.
It could take years. Our average host has usually been working on it somewhere between 9 months to 2 years.
Okay.
It could take years, but better part usually about a year to a year and a half.
Because I know you go to different states.
Absolutely. So somewhere along that line, somewhere between Memorial Day and about Labor Day, they have to get onto our website and apply. And in that application process, they have to be able, in that application, they have to be able to tell us what is your community and how is your display going to differentiate you for others? What are you going to do? Prove to us that you have a coalition of folks around this. Prove to us that you're familiar with what the exhibit is and what you're trying to do. Prove to us that it's not going to be a secondary sideshow. You know, your international festival that you have coming up later this weekend is an incredible event. But this wouldn't be appropriate for it.
Yes.
We've been invited to, you know, state fairs and carnivals. Those are great, but that's not the place for this. This is really into and of itself its own display. Prove to us that you understand that.
And clearly, McKeesport in this region has proven that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they did in the application. They did at the application, and so through that they differentiated themselves from 109 applicants last year.
Wow, incredible.
So 109 applicants applied, and we put together what was a 38 stop for this year, and this is the 24th of our 38 stops. And a lot of folks think that we're going to pick the big cities. A lot of folks think that we're going to pick the, you know, high-style cities, and really and truly, it's not the big cities that make this happen. I'd take a McKeesport over at Pittsburgh any day, with no disrespect to Pittsburgh. I'd take Lincolnton, Georgia, over Atlanta, Georgia every day, because it's those small towns who have that next step. And that next step is, can you coalesce 120 or more volunteers around making the reality of that wall happen? Because when we arrive on that very first day and we're setting the wall up on Wednesday morning, it's going to take 25 to 30 people, the better part of 6 to 8 hours to set that up. They don't have to be, you know, infinitely in wisdom on how to put together the wall, because we're going to guide them through that. But they have to have the stamina and they have to have the strength necessary to haul out 7,000 pounds of a wall. They have to be able to understand that in each of those panels, whether that panel weighs a mere 8 pounds and has 5 names on it, or whether that center panel weighs 80 pounds and has almost 700 names in that, in each of those panels is America's past, our heroes, and our warriors. And that we want it to be as straight here as it is at the wall in Washington, D.C. And we want that magical experience that when you walk up to it and are awed by the beauty, whether you go at 6 in the morning or whether you go at 10 at night, that same magical experience happens for every single visitor here, so that they can say, you know what, I never made it to the wall in Washington, D.C., but this blew me away. Or I was down at the wall in Washington, D.C. last month, and this is as good, if not better. Then we know we've done it right, and we know we've motivated those volunteers. So that person has now developed his or her entire inner circle. And that inner circle extends far beyond just the Vietnam veterans, because you have to get the city involved. Because when all of a sudden we're flooded out down there, somebody has to take care of it. When the power doesn't work, somebody has to respond to that. And all those people make that entire team of 120 to man the wall throughout the day. You know, we got some calls earlier today of saying, are you going to shut down? It's been raining so hard. What are you going to do? You know, we didn't close down this war when it started raining. We didn't close down this war when the mud got deep. We're not going to close the wall because I guarantee you that the ones that are going to go tromping through the mud down there are going to be the Vietnam veterans, no matter if the mud is 3 inches deep and the water is 2 inches on top of that, because they know it's just like another Saigon shower that they experienced every day, and they're going to be down there to see their buddies' names. And I think that's what's very heartening is to hear those volunteers earlier today who had basically taken plastic bags and thrown them over their heads to try to stay dry, saying, you know what, I'm pretty sure that all these guys who are here on the wall endured stuff like this, and I can do this for 3 hours. Then you know you've suddenly sold them on the vision and the emotions, and they get why they're doing it. And then you know that you've delivered on your promise to them when I gave them their orientation on Wednesday. This is going to be the best volunteer experience you've ever had, and you're going to have some of the most incredible stories that you've ever had in life come out of the 3 hours that you'll spend with us.
The volunteers that you had, okay, that came out and wanted to do this, I've noticed that it wasn't just the vets that came out to do this. I saw that there were a lot of women down there who volunteered, even to stay overnight. I understand that the football team, the McKeesport football team, came out to help unload the panels and help erect them. And I also understand that as they took each panel out to erect it, that they were told something very, very reverent to.
Yeah, one of the things, especially when you're, I think that we're blessed right now that we have America responding to this sort of thing. We've seen an increase in our visitor numbers. We've seen an increase in our applications to host the wall. America has turned a corner on Vietnam. Not necessarily turned a corner, but we have a greater awareness right now, and the 50th anniversary. And so, but our Vietnam veterans, on average, are in their mid-70s, and their bodies just can't cash those checks that their minds want them and their hearts want them to do. I had a Vietnam veteran up on the top of the trailer. That trailer's 13 and a half feet off the ground. He wanted to get up there because he could, but I had 3 Vietnam veterans who are struggling to carry an 80-pound panel. And so if we can't have those young high schoolers and those young volunteers being willing to be out here at 3 in the morning, we're going to struggle in putting on a first-rate event. And yet we have to bridge that, because those people, when they're in their 20s or 30s or they're teenagers, look at it as names. And when you have an opportunity and when you can start that, you need to start with those high school kids, and you need to sit there and say, guys, I want you to think about this. When you're carrying one of these panels, I want you to treat it as if you're carrying the coffin of one of your teammates who unfortunately just died. I want you to think of them as that individual and that long-lost buddy, because there's a few people in our midst that we are literally carrying their brothers and sisters. We're literally carrying the comrades who they might have died in their arms. You need to make certain you carry it with that respect. So for these lighter panels, we're going to carry them with their names towards the heavens, because they deserve that. For the heavier panels, we'll turn them on edge, but we're certainly not going to have those next to our body, because we want to make certain that these folks receive the respect they get. We don't want to put it down. We certainly don't want to drop them. And we want to forever remember that each and every one of these people counts as if they were our best friend or our brother or our sister. And getting them to then understand that makes certain that, you know what, they're not going to goof around. They're not going to have a time. And it was incredibly moving for me to be sitting in the trailer and watching the 2 young men who were unloading every single one of the 146 panels. And there were 2 young men who came in who were a little too flippant. Now, I don't know how old this one kid was. He might have been a high school junior, but he turned around and told both those boys, he said, I don't want to see you back in here. You guys don't care enough anymore. You're not going to come back in and get any more panels. And he turned and told what was probably one of the captains of the football team, hey, you know what? I told those guys not to come back in for it. They then get it. They're then enforcing it, and they understand it. Now, the boys hadn't been totally out of line. There certainly wasn't something I needed to take to their coach, but this kid had taken it to the next level, and that was the importance and the understanding. Of course, then at the culmination, we had all the panels up, all the names there. Drive home 1 final story or 2 final stories. You know, these kids are student athletes. To them, they're there because it's football practice, and to them, it's all about football. So if you can point out, the name of James Calsu, you're able to then show them the name of a professional football player. Everybody's aspiration when you're a kid at some time or another is to put on a pro football team. James Calsu, became an All-American. He was such an incredible football player. He was All-American and inducted into the NCAA Hall of Fame. He went on, was drafted, and played the first season for the Buffalo Bills. And after his first season, he got a call from the Army and said, by the way, you went to ROTC and you owe us your time back. But don't worry, we're not going to send you off to Vietnam. So, and I didn't tell the boys this story because it's too long of a story, but James Kalsu was a big guy, big football player. James Kalsu came from a privileged family in Oklahoma. Had a privileged white family and was just absolutely, the token small town, or not small town, but token Midwestern, American. James Kalsu befriended a young, equally large black man from Louisiana, and they would race carrying mortar rounds up and down the hill. They said wherever you found James Kalsu, you would find him, and side by side they would serve together. And even though James Kalsu was an officer and this young man was a young enlisted man who probably had been drafted, they were tied at the hip and became best buddies. And unfortunately, the night that their base came under attack, they both died side by side. That's that sense of teamwork that the kids get. And then you pivot to the youngest on the wall, because every single one of those boys that we had there was older than the youngest person on the wall. You pivot to Dan Bullock. Dan Bullock, a young black American who had decided that he wanted to serve his country. He had grown up in a house in North Carolina. His mom and dad had gotten divorced, and his dad had moved to New York City. His dad was a sharecropper. You can't be a sharecropper in New York City. So his dad went from odd job to odd job trying to figure things out. And after his mom had died and he had to move to New York City, he saw an escape. Dan saw an escape as getting into the military. He took a forged birth certificate and tried to get in the Army as a 13-year-old and couldn't make it into the Army. Took that same forged birth certificate to the Marine Corps when he was 14, and the Marine Corps said, sure, come on in. Now 14 years old going through Marine Corps boot camp. No matter what boot camp you went through, Marine Corps boot camp is the hardest. It's the hardest and it's the longest. And Dan went through it as a 14-year-old. And after 3 weeks in Vietnam as a 15-year-old, Dan Bullock was killed when his bunker was overrun. The youngest person on the wall, the Marine Corps didn't even know he was 15 until they went to notify his dad that he had been killed. He was younger than every single one of those football players that was there. And he was that tie that all of a sudden those young men realized that, you know what, you ready to go off tomorrow? Today was easy. Your practice tonight's going to be easy. You're not having to put anything on the line other than a little bit of sweat and a little bit of hard work. And at the end of the day, you're going to get to come home. And they then get to understand a total different level of that wall.
So they had a whole different understanding when you explained it to them.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope they walk away from it and it's not just a what did you do for 3 days, but they're moved to the point of bringing their family and their friends back and have that as a moment.
So what do we do now with the 1,600 missing in action?
Right now we have 1,574 missing in action, I think is our list coming into this year. We're still recovering. Last year was an incredible banner year for recovery of remains. They recovered 15 remains in 2017. We changed their status symbols on the wall because those folks are all included on the wall. They're still doing a wonderful job towards recovering those remains. But yet the soils and the erosion that happens in Vietnam and just the circumstances around some of their deaths, unfortunately, we're never going to be able to return them.
Right.
I anticipate we'll probably change a dozen or so symbols next year that'll be returned from this year. The United States made a promise because of the pressure of the families of the MIAs and the POWs in Vietnam that they'd return them all home. They're not going to give up, and there's still plenty of pressure making that happen. We're starting to see some other war remains returned in the recent return of remains from Korea. But as long as we continue to tell their stories, as long as we continue to remember and see that there is a difference there, and continue to remember them for their service and sacrifice, I know we will never forget them. I've met many of their family members who are waiting for a place to say, my dad is here. I've met many of them who then get a chance to come down to the wall after dad gets to return home and see that sense of closure. And I know that that's a magical opportunity that so many of them deserve. And I think as a nation that we're not going to give up. I know that the military has that creed built into them to not give up. And as long as we can continue to pursue that, I think that'll be a homecoming worthy of wait for all of us.
Absolutely. So now, where's the next city?
We leave here on Sunday afternoon. We'll head on to Warren, Ohio for our 25th stop of the year. And, you know, we're wrapping down towards November and culminating another season. But each and every city brings its own set of challenges, whether it be weather-related or how do you structure things. Each and every city brings its own special memories. And I always laugh when I arrived here and we had the escort in on Tuesday evening. People are going, "Where are you going next?" And I said, "I haven't even set up here yet. Don't kick me out of town yet." We still have an incredible weekend in front of us. Saturdays are always some of the busiest days. We've had thousands visit already, and I'm optimistic we're still going to have thousands that are going to visit throughout the weekend. The magic is still happening out there. The magic will continue to happen out there. But the magic that's going to happen is what's going to happen afterwards in the months and years to come.
After you're gone.
Correct. Is McKeesport, are the people who got to see this going to bring up a question about, hey, how did this happen? Remember when we went to the wall, did we see this person? The McKeesport legacy and this wall's legacy will be when someone who's a Vietnam veteran passes, is someone going to remember to honor them in the in-memory program. The McKeesport legacy is going to be the legacy of those football players to say, am I going to be willing to raise my hand and serve this country if my country asks of me? Or am I going to be willing to go off and do that? That's going to be the legacy that this wall leaves behind. That'll happen in the coming weeks and the months and the years. And every single time you can sit there and say, I remember when, or because the wall was here, I did this. Then we know that that legacy lives on, and our story will live on for decades to come.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Tim, for just sharing all of this with us. You are a wealth of information, and we thank you for all that you've done to bring this.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You guys have done an incredible job.
And the region.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.
One of the harsh lessons learned from the war in Vietnam is that we should never ever turn our backs on those brave individuals who unselfishly placed themselves between us and our enemies. I wear this cover with pride and respect in honor of those brave warriors who fought and died, are missing in action, were wounded, and are still suffering from wounds received in Vietnam. We salute you and wholeheartedly welcome you home. And now, let's return to more scenes from The Wall That Heals.
My name's Donald Nemchik. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran. I was born in McKeesport, PA, and I'm proud to be part of the Romeo Group and those who have been acknowledging the memory of the McKeesport 23. My story's very compelling. My cousin Michael J. Nemchik was killed February 22nd, 1966. That was just 1 week shy of his 19th birthday. It's very memorable to me, although these years have passed. I was a young boy, 15 years old, coming home from school. We were all pepped up because the McKeesport High School basketball team was playing in the playoffs, and we were getting ready to go to the games, and just a high-spirited group of young men. I came home and I sensed something was wrong. Come home and my mother and father were sitting at the kitchen table with a very solemn look on their face, and I couldn't understand it because typically they were of good spirits. Well, my dad told me what had happened. Mike was killed, and he had a tear in his eye. Now you have to remember, these are hard-charging World War II veterans who were steel workers and pretty tough guys that we looked up to. That was the first time I see my dad cry. Later on, with the funeral and all the ceremonies that were held on Mike's behalf, you know, time just moved on. Mike's older brother, Bill, also served. He served in the United States Air Force, and later on, during the war, he was assigned to an Air Force base as a security sergeant. Well, the Air Force base came under attack. Consequently, the attack was on February 22nd. And Bill told us, he says, I had such a fear, not the fear that I was being attacked and had to fight. I was fearful that I was going to die on the same day as my brother, February 22nd. It stayed with me. We've been very instrumental in keeping the memory of Mike and the McKeesport 23 alive. Most of the fellow veterans from this McKeesport area have bonded, and we've done numerous functions that keep this memory alive. Throughout my travels in McKeesport, etc., with my last name, someone always asked me, oh, are you Mike's cousin? He was such a good dude. Oh, he always wanted to carry the flag in the parades. He was so helpful to all the other fellas. That's the legacy that he left behind. It's very important to me to keep that legacy alive in my own way. We oftentimes tell ourselves we won't forget, and it's on a daily basis. Something will trigger us and we'll just remember something. And when the fellows get together for our monthly breakfast, everybody will always talk about one of the fellows of the McKeesport 23. It's very important to me, again, as a veteran, to stay with this, to keep my spirit and my strength dedicated to their memory. These are boys that we lost. Who knows what they would have brought to this country, to this area, to mankind with their talents and with their spirit. The Vietnam Wall That Heals was an ongoing project that has taken almost about 2 years to manifest itself. You know, with the motorcade coming and to escort the arrival of the van that brought the wall, we had an overwhelming response of over 200 motorcyclists, friends and family lining the streets of McKeesport to pay homage to a wall, to a granite wall that was more than just a piece of stone or something that was erected. These were boys that we all knew and loved. Having the wall here at Renzi Park, at a ball field where many of us had played, where many of the McKeesport 23 had played ball and got together with their buddies as young men as we were. This is a very fitting time and place for it. Oftentimes, many of us veterans stayed over for the 3 days in order just to network with each other, see who we're going to see, and also to help others who perhaps wanted to find a name that was on the wall. They didn't have the book of names that we have. I have an app on my cell phone that enabled me to do that. And what's most noteworthy yesterday, Saturday, a lady come up to John Hernandez and I, we were helping some people, and you could tell she was somewhat timid, but she needed our help. We asked her, ma'am, can we help you? Well, she had 3 names, unsure of the spelling of those names, that she wanted to identify and honor on that wall, to get a rubbing, something to take home with her, and to offer a prayer. We were able to find the names for her pretty easily, and I escorted her over to the wall to get the rubbing and just to be a shoulder for her. One of the very nice young men from McKeesport High School came over to me and offered, he says, sir, can I help you find a name? I said, son, I know where the name is. We're going to get a rubbing. Well, he provided us with the form and the charcoal pencil, and he even offered, since the names were on the bottom of the panel, since he's young and limber, he offered to, sir, let me do that for you. And I thought that was noteworthy and something that was, we could be proud of here in McKeesport. McKeesport gets a lot of bad rap. Some of it's deserved, some of it's not. But you get stand-up young men like this, it certainly makes you feel a lot better. The opening ceremonies were most compelling. We had politicians, senators, veterans speak to the group. Of course, we had the bagpipes playing. And what really stayed with me, many of us veterans were called to the stage to be recognized as veterans. Many of these guys had not ever received any type of acknowledgement over the 50 years. Many of them said, this is the first time anybody even called my name in a veterans program. And that stayed with me because these fellas served their country, came home, went about their lives, and now, so many years later, they're finally getting some recognition. And it was very heartwarming to see the turnout of McKeesport and area residents come and stand very tall to recognize the not only the McKeesport 23 and the over 58,000 names on that wall, but just anyone who had served. Numerous times through that evening, I was thanked for my service. I was approached by people who I didn't know, but it didn't matter. It was just something that we were all proud of.
Tell us what being here today means to you, and with the wall being in the region, How does that make you feel?
Well, it's always a very emotional thing to see. I looked a couple of my friends up on the wall, and it still breaks my heart when I see their names and I remember their faces because they were young men, and when I look them up online, I still see young men who will never get older, and they will never, kiss their babies and love their wives and things like that. And you wonder why them, not you. I think it's the guilt that we all share. But we love to come out here, and it's also very nice too. When it was lighter out, I could see the etchings, how they were scuffed, the etchings, and I thought to myself, God bless those people who came to this wall wherever it was at, and took the etchings of their friends and their family,
and all the families that are affected by this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, as they called the family of the people who had passed away, and they're older people now too, and they brought their kids and their grandkids. Very touching, very, very beautiful ceremony, and it was done very, very nicely, very well by whoever put this together. It was very nice.
Yeah, I always think about the wall as some gave some and some gave all. The ones that didn't come home, you think about them a lot, And there was 58,318 of them that never made it back. So we always think about them. Matter of fact, in Soldiers and Sailors, we have a visual for the POWs and MIAs coming up in September. And the Vietnam veterans support that highly. They're there.
And we also think about the 1,600 that are MIA.
Yes, absolutely.
They need not be forgotten.
My brother was killed in Vietnam in '66, so it's an experience like he came home, and it helped us. I was able to visit him every day, and I was able to talk to him again. I mean, he couldn't talk back to me in the way we used to, but I could still hear his voice. The hole and heartache's always going to be there, but every time I go and visit the wall, I get better. It's the first time I went there, I was very, very, very emotional. So I'd say yes, it does help the healing process.
Tell our viewers what this wall means to you and what it means to your city.
Well, I think, it's about more than our city. But with the city in particular, we do have 24 members that were affiliated with the city, that are on this wall. We have 2 memorials in town, and one with 23, the other one with 11, and 10 of them overlap. So I think, here in the city of McKeesport, we truly always look to do whatever we can to honor our veterans. To get this wall here is to me, it's like the Super Bowl of any way you can honor the veterans. You're talking about a war in which these men and women, they didn't get a warm welcome. It was the exact opposite.
Correct.
And I think this is an opportunity to really bring this here, to welcome them home, for the family members, to friends of the loved ones, to fellow soldiers. That's where my father was just here showing me 3 of the men in his, the captain and 2 others that he was with, and it just means so much to them. This was before my time. I can't imagine what these individuals go through. I just see through my father and what he's experienced, and it's so personal in that way. And to me, I get emotional over it, and it's I'm very excited. I'm ecstatic to really just play a small part in being able to help this wall come here and help so many people with the healing process.
And I've noticed here as well that there are so many family members here that came out to honor all of these soldiers that have perished. And I mean, I am just overwhelmed in seeing this wall, and I think it's just something that's very amazing that's been able to, that's mobile and being able to brought to the different cities to honor our fallen.
I think it's absolutely incredible. I mean, to see the people who's here this evening, that's going to be here throughout the week. I mean, to have it come here into the city, I said it early when I spoke, my proudest moment as mayor, to stand here on behalf of the city. It's not about us elected officials at all, but to just play a small part of it and just, it's incredible. And I'm just very blessed to have the opportunity to stand before everyone as mayor and to be here today as mayor of the city and to host the wall that hills here in the city of McKeesport.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very honored that you would speak to us today about something so personal.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's an honor.
The wall actually looks like it's glowing. As the sun goes down, it actually looks like it's glowing. Give us your name.
Hello, my name is Mike Long.
Hey, Mike.
From McKeesport, born and raised here in McKeesport.
Wonderful, wonderful. Tell our viewers what being here means to you today.
Well, it means a lot because I was looking on the back of this the sheet here, and one of the 23 that's on the wall from McKeesport is my second cousin. And I never knew I had one. So that was a big shock to me because all my aunts and uncles were, like well older than they should have been.
Right.
But, just to be here today, it's just a wonderful feeling. It really is. And couldn't get much better. It was a beautiful day and a beautiful turnout. And Walt Yeager, well, my wife Candy and myself, we have an oldies radio show on McKeesport's WEDO, and we had Walt Yeager on our show yesterday, and he talked about the 23 from McKeesport, and he talked for an hour and a half, and I said, you go right ahead, and he talked about every single boy on there, and where they went to school at, everything. And it was just a wonderful thing. We're trying to get them back up on our show tomorrow.
Nice. Well, I did a piece on the McKeesport 23.
Did you?
Probably about, I don't know, maybe 5 months ago, over at Di's place. I did a piece on the McKeesport 23, and it was wonderful with Joe Hoffman and the fellas. So.
Okay. Well, this lady sitting next to me. Vicki
Lakovic. Vicki Lakovic, born and raised in McKeesport. I had a twin brother, Victor Lakovic, who served over in Vietnam. He came home, but he was a little messed up when he did come home. But fortunately, he's been gone for 22 years now. But this means a lot to me because the 23, one of them I went to school with, Thomas Sweeney. So it means a lot, and it just means a lot. You have to appreciate this.
It's a wonderful tribute.
It really is. It's a beautiful tribute. That wall is beautiful. I saw it in Washington, D.C., and this replica of it is awesome.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much. Candy, tell us what this means to you.
Oh, my goodness.
Just being here, I know it's very overwhelming,
yes,
but
it is, absolutely.
Tell our viewers what this means to you.
First off, I think it's the most wonderful and beautiful thing that could ever be here in McKeesport. God bless anybody who was involved in this, and God bless everyone.
Thank you, Candy, for sharing that with us.
Hi, I'm Norma Keefitt. Grew up in Duquesne, and just being here and seeing this, I love history, and this is just, I wish I could see their real one.
Yeah, she's never saw it.
But it's beautiful, and all the names and that, and I knew some people that served over there, and that's really, this is something.
Are their names on the wall, or
no,
they came home?
They came home, so that's a good thing. Yeah. But I've seen other things. September, I was at Normandy, and to walk through the museum there and to look out onto that beach and know what happened, and and then now to see this, I feel privileged that I can get around to see all these places. And
it is truly an honor.
Yes, and I'd love to go to one of these days. I'll get to Washington to see the real one, but
you will get there.
My name's Dorothy Englert, and I looked up the boys that I went to their funeral. Oh. Yeah, they were two of them from the McKeesport 23.
Which ones were they?
Curtis Gay and James West. I went to their. My husband was friends with these, and at that time there was funerals going on all the time. my husband grew up with these boys, you know, and it's really wonderful to be able to go and see these things. Most people don't see what this is. It's just mind-boggling that these boys some of these came home and they didn't get no recognition, no nothing, and they got spit on and everything else. At least these boys are getting something anyway. I'm just privileged to see it.
They are getting honored.
Yes.
They're getting honored. They're getting the honor that they deserve. They should have had it before, and the fact that, just take a look at the wall now with the sun going down. Look at the gold colors on the wall. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. When the sun is up, you can just see the black granite, but you can actually see the etchings now on the wall. It's just absolutely beautiful.
When I heard it was coming, it started at Aldi's, which is an Olympia shopping center right down this road here. And I thought it was going to come straight up, which is maybe less than a mile. But it went all the way out Walnut Street. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Not familiar, but...
Then all the way down Lyle Boulevard. Then all the way up Hartman Street. Then all the way down Eden Park. I got goose pimples. There were over 200 motorcyclists. And these men... I'm going to cry.
It's all right.
These men were all part of this, but they came home. And I was upset. I had goose pimples and I cried. But this, looking at this now, can you just look and visualize each one of these young men standing up? Look at them.
That's beautiful.
And I'm just proud to be here. Very proud. And it's nice of you to talk to me, too.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I'm crying.
That's quite all right. Thank you so much. It is an emotional time.
Very. I don't have any family. I have a lot of friends, you know. Being my age, my friends, their children, you know, but it just feels like we're all here. And to see this many people come and be so interested, you know, McKeesport's a good place. We stick together.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear.
I mean, these are the 30 names that I read off the wall down in D.C. Yeah, and we went down there last year, and we had guys from VBI. We read names off the wall last year for Veterans Day to commemorate, you know, the 35th anniversary of the wall. And then this year we're going down to D.C. in November, again, Veterans Day, to help them celebrate the women's 25th anniversary, the women's wall. And that, I mean, these are the names that I read last year. Wow. 30 names right there. And I was in the Air Force. I was over in Vietnam 66, 67. And I was crew chief on F-4 Phantoms.
We are standing on sacred ground while the Vietnam Veterans Wall is here today and over the next several days. For a very good reason. The people that are on the wall made the supreme sacrifice to our country. No less than anyone else in the history of our country. They were brave, they were courageous, and they deserve to be enshrined on this wall. At the same time, it reminds us of the negative effects of war, how many people can die. And Pennsylvania, this region, McKeesport High School, has 24 of our brothers on that wall. The Mon Valley has hundreds of people on the wall. Pennsylvania has over 3,000. We have made a significant contribution to the honor of our country, especially related to military service.
And it's just unfortunate that all of this sacrifice, when our soldiers came, when our servicemen came home and women came home, they weren't greeted so warmly.
No, they weren't, and Vietnam veterans remember that, and they remember it quite well. And I think that's one of the reasons why veterans today that have served in the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan and other locations, even though especially the war in Iraq has been an unpopular war, you do not see our country disrespect the veteran. Vietnam veterans would not put up with it. And we need to honor the people that serve our country. It's less than 1% of our population today, far less than it was historically.
And you yourself being a Vietnam vet, I'm sure that this really brings it all home to you. Does this give you closure, or does this give you more or less remembrance of what was?
It never gives you closure, but it helps reinforce the importance of someone committing themselves to a larger cause. And let's face it, a lot of us were not happy about how the Vietnam War was conducted. At the same time, we still served our country. And the people who truly gave all are the people enshrined on the wall.
Absolutely. And you all did it with dignity, honor, and you should be respected for it.
Why, thank you, but anyone that serves their country should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the important message.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
My name is Jim Berry. I'm the executive director of the La Rosa Boys and Girls Club in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. Yes, Sam began the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Services at the Boys and Girls Club in McKeesport on Veterans Day in 1966. And as his health was failing, he reached out to Tom McGlicko and myself to make sure that we would never let those services go by the wayside. And we can proudly say for the last 52 years, we've continuously run services representing the 11 young men from the club who were killed in Vietnam for the last 52 years, both on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. I was brothers. Actually, I was friends with 4 very good friends: Jeff Merlin, Tim Merlin, Scott Merlin, and Terry Merlin, who were brothers of Thomas Jitter Sweeney, who was on the wall. So I had a personal connection to them because I knew them and their parents very well. So that was my connection emotionally to the memorial service. Over the years, I've got to know many families. Ironically, just this week, one family who I'd never connected with over the last 40+ years was the family of Curtis Gay. And his first cousin, one of his last known living survivors, brought his yearbook to the Boys and Girls Club on Friday and gave it to me because she said that it was such an important place for Kurt, where he really found himself and really had a sense of belonging that Sam provided him there. And she wanted that yearbook to be presented to the Boys and Girls Club, and that's what she did. She brought it on Friday. Personally, it's meant to me so much because of the archives that Sam La Rosa has kept over the years regarding Vietnam veterans. I've read a lot of the letters as Sam corresponded back and forth to club members from Vietnam, many of them soiled and smudged with fingerprints because they were written from a jungle in Southeast Asia thousands of miles away. And I personally connected on that level. I actually have a letter that was written by Michael Nemchek to Sam that was returned to sender to Sam in March of 1966 and marked deceased because Michael was killed in action after Sam had sent the letter. You see, Michael wanted to be a Boys and Girls Club professional and follow in the footsteps of Sam La Rosa, and he was never able to fulfill that dream because he was killed in action in Vietnam. I would say thank you, because it's because of you that we can do things and perform the miracles that we perform on a daily basis at the Boys and Girls Club, because of the freedoms you protected for us and the ultimate sacrifice you made for us. And I'd say from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of me and all the kids that we serve, thank you and God bless you.
It was about 4 or 5 years ago that I realized that the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam era was upon us. And what I did is I went back and looked at the thesis that my son wrote. There's some irony there based on the fact that the city of McKeesport basically raised me. My dad was killed in Anzio when he was 24 years old. I was 4 months old at the time. My son passed away at the age of 24 also. He left a little boy, Ryan Andrew, age 4. And all of this is basically dedicated to them. Sean had many suggestions for carrying this forward. And one of them was to commemorate the Vietnam Veterans Memorial at McKeesport as uniquely one of our first. And I think we've done that. We brought attention to this area and the sacrifices. The second was to also engage the McKeesport Area School District to further research and prepare biographical sketches of each of these McKeesport heroes. And that's an ongoing project. Sergeant DeFelice has been so dedicated to this. The third one was kind of a long shot. I went out to Gettysburg on the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. I knew that Ken Burns was going to do a documentary, and I felt McKeesport was unique enough that they would entertain that. I have some photos with him, but they told me that they had received so much information that they were unable to include us. They suggested that we do something on a local basis to recognize McKeesport, and I'm hopeful that maybe WQED, and I know Carl Truss is doing much along those lines to do that. But the last thing that Sean recommended was to bring that wall here. So, you know, from that standpoint, I think we hit a home run. The thing about it is, I apologize to you. I haven't had the time to run around to get a haircut. This hat that I have is kind of weather beaten and battered, but it's Sean's hockey hat. I got in trouble one time. We sleep in North Huntington. Our hearts never left the port. And I ran a support ad for the McKeesport Tiger football team. It was from Sean Yeager. It said, born a knight, but in a Tiger tradition. So God bless you, and God bless all of you for being here. There's been so many divine providence things that have happened. The Vietnam Veterans Inc. of Pittsburgh, Tommy Cusick, Ed Blank, they've just introduced me to over 1,500 Vietnam vets. Todd DiPastino. And the only thing I can say to you, they have formal and informal breakfasts. If you ever have the opportunity to go there and you're a vet, they'll have you tell your story. And the one thing that they'll say to you that they didn't get was, welcome home.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time with another unsung hero on Let's Talk.